Boxing philosophy is about understanding, in a specific sense, understanding the motion in the ring. And it's about questions. For example, many years ago, Socrates revolutionized understanding simply by asking questions. And we ask questions, but in the boxing context, like, who has the best jab in boxing? Is it Larry Holmes? Is it Lennox Lewis? Who has the best left hook to the body? And who is the best counterpuncher? And who has the best boxing IQ? Because boxing is about psychology, it's about contracts, it's about business, it's about passion, and ultimately it's about understanding the multifarious layers within the boxing context. So Inoue, in a simple sense, is explosive. He is technical. At first, when I first saw him, he reminded me of Manny Pacquiao. He has that intensity, that speed, and he has this capacity to really overwhelm his opponents. And whether it's the triple left hook or that explosive one too, Inoue mixes technique. He mixes technique with excellence. He entertains the crowd and he overwhelms his opponents. He is the truth and he deserves recognition. Many consider Inoue as the top 3 on the pound for pound list. That in itself is exceptional and it shows that he has elite caliber. He reads openings in a split second and he punishes every mistake. He carries that quiet menace, knowing that one shot can totally end the night. And there's patience behind his violence, a calm mind directing brutal precision. When Inoue steps through the ropes, you're not just watching a fight, you're watching a statement. This man is on an elite level. Now, before we move into the main sections, here is a quick caveat. I apologize in advance for any mispronunciation. So let's get started. What is mental strength? Or what does mental strength look like? That's probably a much better question. Now, when Muhammad Ali showed mental strength to endure punishing blows from George Foreman, Evander Holyfield showed mental strength when he took those blows from Riddick Bowe in round 10 of their first fight. Now, these two examples, they're extreme. They're of an extreme nature. But there is another chapter, or there is another element to mental strength. There is a mental strength, for example, to get through a training camp, a mental strength to maintain composure. There is a mental strength in trusting your power, trusting your technique, and trusting your trainer, trusting your corner, etc. And it can go on and on. Now, Inoue's mental strength, from my perspective, is in his calm, because he walks into hostile arenas and treats them like they're his own gym. He moves up in weight, faces bigger men, and never changes his expression, the ultimate poker face. There is a mental strength in how he waits for the perfect opening instead of trying to force the knockout. He's patient, but he's aggressive at the same time. There is a mental strength in how he gets clipped, resets his feet, and then comes back even stronger. He trusts his preparation so deeply that big fight pressure just becomes like another round of sparring. From my perspective, Inoue believes in his own power and he never tries to rush it. He never chases it. He lets it arrive on time. Inoue just doesn't break opponents up physically. He breaks their belief, and that is the mental strength at a higher level, or at least on a different level. So let's talk about the Nonito Donaire fight. Now, Nonito Donaire was a very popular name in boxing. I remember his power early in his career. I actually have this vague recollection of him, and I believed he knocked down an opponent even though the punch was blocked. So, Donaire had serious power. He was full of speed, and he was a multiple world champion. And because he was Filipino, they were comparing him to Manny Pacquiao. And Anita Donaire was the underdog in the first fight, even though he had, that reputation and he had those accomplishments. Clearly his career was nearing its end. But he deeply, deeply tested Inoue in that fight, or in their first fight. In round 2, a right hand from Donaire damaged Inoue's orbital bone. And in rounds 4, and in rounds 5, and in rounds 9, Donaire landed some big punches. Think of this. It's in these moments that we see our true character. And we might ask a question: do we quit? Do we survive? Or do we try and find solutions? This is when it gets hard. This is where your psychology can get deeply affected. Your nature of reality suspended as you deal with a very, very strong opposing force. It's a powerful point. But Inoue walked through that jungle because he weathered that storm. He fought like a warrior. And Donaire, another warrior, broke Inoue's nose and fractured his orbital bone. That's the brutal reality. But he could not break or fracture Inoue's spirit. This is the psychology of a true champion. I repeat, this is the psychology of a true champion. Experience is essential in life. Let me explain. Let's say you go to a job interview, and in this job interview, the first time you go for it, you lose your words, you stumble, and you miss your chance. But if you got a second shot at the job interview and you learned from your experience, you'd walk in sharper, stronger, and ultimately more prepared. Sometimes that's all it takes to decide the difference between winning and losing, the difference between getting the job or facing rejection, the difference between a close decision or a knockout. Now, with the rematch with Donaire, this told the story of experience. A straight right with a short trajectory claimed the first knockdown in round 1, and a vicious left hook from Inoue introduced the beginning of the end in round 2. And let's give Donaire some credit here. To stay standing after such a formidable punch says a lot about his character, and it shows that ultimately he's a true warrior. And of course, the ending was inevitable. And when one warrior dies, another one rises. In this sense, the torch was passed from one legend to another. And in one sense, they both shared a common anomaly. They were power punchers at lighter weights. When they punched, you could hear the force. It felt like punches from super middleweights or light heavyweights. You could feel the energy. That's power that transcends physical stature. Anyway, the victory cemented Inoue as the ring's pound for pound at the time. It was a significant victory, and it showed that he had a high level of excellence. Now, when you're undefeated, I would argue that your reality is different. You punch different, you move different, and your belief is on a different level. You have a different mindset. So when Inoue stepped up against Stephen Fulton, he walked straight into that psychology of belief. In one sense, Inoue was looking into a mirror. And you can ask yourself, what does a lion see when he stares at another lion? Does he see fear? Does he see competition? Or does he see just another lion? In this fight, Stephen held the WBO and he held the WBC titles. He was a real, solid, strong opposing force. So this battle showed the technical side of Inoue, because in the 8th round, Inoue's jab to the body wasn't just a weapon. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a trap. Because after that 3rd jab to the body, came the thunderous, and I mean thunderous, right hand to the head. And just like that, it was over. Think of it like this. The jab to the body was a distraction from the knockout punch. That jab to the body, it was almost like the web. And the right hand, that was like the bite. In this context, Inoue wasn't just dominant. He was absolutely sensational. Because in the jungle, all the lions are strong. But at the same time, not all the lions are the same. He just does mastery. He just learns his craft. He goes into the ring and he performs. It's as simple as that. He just goes to these different levels. It's like if you throw more punches at him, or if you be more aggressive, then there's more of a response. So it's almost like the more you bring is the more that you reveal about his boxing identity or about his brilliance. So when we talk about this year and we talk about who are the biggest stars of 2025, it's a difficult question, but I feel like maybe it's not the big, when you talk about biggest stars and biggest boxing stars and the most proficient, when we talk about proficiency, we have to talk about Bivol. Now, the draw against Beterbiev was a brilliant fight. Beterbiev was ferocious. Bivol was technically brilliant. It was a great boxing combination. This one was for the purists. It was for the boxing purists. And I think we all collectively, we respected their efforts. We respected what they bring to the ring. The rematch between Bivol and Beterbiev had great curiosity. Could Beterbiev be more ferocious? Could he throw more punches and even have more pop in the shots? Could Bivol be more technically brilliant? This could be or would be a defining chapter in both careers. A defining chapter. And in the end, the narrative bias that Beterbiev was more ferocious, but Bivol was even more technical. I mean, and what was amazing there, even though Bivol was technically brilliant, at times he stayed in the pocket and he went through the phases. He didn't just throw the 1-2. He threw the 1-2, then he'd throw a 1-2-3, then he'd throw another 1-2, then he'd throw a 1 to the body and then then a 4 to the head. It was a gear change. But as well as being a gear change, going up the gears, it was also brave. The more Beterbiev pushed, the more Bivol retaliated by going through the phases. And this, for me, cemented Bivol's mastery and perhaps cemented his legacy. And what was the matrix that I've spoken about before? It was slips, high guard, half steps, jabs, 1-2s, and phases. This was the recipe. This was the recipe for success. Both men were brave, but Bivol excelled further. This was Bivol's moment. Remember, great fighters have great moments. Think of this. Think of Roy Jones versus James Toney. Roy Jones had a massive moment. Evander Holyfield versus Mike Tyson. That was Evander Holyfield's big moment. Larry Holmes versus Ken Norton. That was a significant fight. Rocky Marciano, Jersey Joe Walcott, etc. Great moments are great, right? They are great. But all great moments are great in different ways. What am I saying here? Think of this. In other words, not every great moment is the same. And Bivol had his great moment. Now, Bivol, from my perspective, he reached the mountaintop with this one. I thought he reached the mountaintop with the Canelo performance. He really just took it to another level there. But in this matchup or in this rematch, he surpassed the standard. He surpassed the standard. And the standard was simply exemplary. So Bivol's name has since the rematch, since that great victory, Bivol's name has gone silent, even within boxing circles. But please, let's not forget that he put on a boxing clinic. Let's not forget that he put together a piece of mastery, and that should be respected. And you know what? I really like Bivol. When he came into that fight with Beterbiev, I realized that Bivol was really good, but I also acknowledged that Beterbiev was a legitimate monster. He wasn't just a hype machine. He was the real deal. And, it was a massive challenge for Bivol. And for me this year, it just put that magnifying glass back on how brilliant Bivol was. And I think that Bivol is not this massive charismatic guy shouting about how great he is. He's not like a heavily marketed fighter like some of the British fighters and particularly the Americans. But he just does mastery. He just learns his craft. He goes into the ring and he performs. It's as simple as that. He just goes to these different levels. It's like if you throw more punches at him, or if you be more aggressive, then there's more of a response. So it's almost like the more you bring is the more that you reveal about his boxing identity or about his brilliance. And 2025 for me in that rematch, it just, I just stood in awe of that performance, particularly in the second half when it looked like Butterbiev was getting control. And when Butterbiev starts to get control, he knocks fighters out. That's fact. But against Bivol, he took it to another level. As I stated, it was matrix mode. And I think we really have to take our hats off to Bivol and appreciate him while he is here. Let's appreciate the brilliance. Let's appreciate the mastery. The unfortunate element of Bivol is that even though he's a master, even though he's technically brilliant, even though he's appreciated by the boxing purists, he is appreciated by the boxing purists. I may be mistaken here, but my understanding is that even though Bivol Butterbiev 1 was a great fight and Bivol Butterbiev 2 was a great fight, the rematch was pay-per-view, and I don't believe that the rematch from an economic perspective performed as well as many would have hoped. And this is the thing about boxing. It's about making a distinction between the boxing, from the levels of the boxing, and from the levels of the business. You can have great business and bad boxing, and you can have great boxing and bad business. So even though the Bivol and Butterbiev 2 was amazing from the boxing purist perspective, we loved it. From an economic perspective, I believe it just broke even. I might be wrong about that, but the point is this. Let's assume that premise is true and it just broke even. That means that even though it was a great fight, because economically the numbers weren't correct, or it didn't, let's say if you invested 40 million into a fight and then it makes 40 million, that means you broke even. But if you invested 40 million and then you got 60 million, that means you made 20 million. So even if a fight, even if you get a great fight with two great warriors, I guess this is what I'm trying to say. Don't let the capitalism of boxing undermine the brilliance of boxing. So if Bivol and Butterbiev 2 did not perform well economically, that doesn't mean it wasn't a great fight. But at the same time, a fight can perform economically, but it might be a low-level fight with regards to the technical standard or with regards to the entertainment. I mean, there's different gauges of how we measure a fight. So it's quite unfortunate, because I hope that there's a difference between the business of boxing and the mastery of boxing. But I really hope with Bivol that the people with the money, the investors, are still going to pump money into that machine, because it would be great to see, as Bivol may be coming to the end of his career, maybe he's not, but if he does have other fighting opportunities, hopefully these will be against elite fighters. So I'm hoping that the business of boxing, or the capitalism of boxing, doesn't undermine the potential matchups that Bivol can have, because Bivol is an elite fighter. I think undeniably he's in the top 3 pay-per-view. He's in the top 3 as the pound-for-pound fighters. And I just hope to see. I think he has an injury at the moment, but hopefully he'll have a speedy recovery, and hopefully we can see either the Butterbiev 3, or maybe there's some other mouth-watering matchups, because I get the feeling that with Bivol, the better the opposition, the better we get from Bivol. So hopefully there's other matchups that will will enable him to transcend and be the best version of himself. So 2025 really again was signified just how great Bivol was. did try to use the jab. Yes, he did try to throw counters, but he just couldn't go through the gears. And that's what Chris Eubank Jr. does. Despite that, though, regardless of whether he can perform at an elite level, Chris Eubank Jr. he's a master of marketing. So in 2025, from the British context, you had the Chris Eubank Jr. and the Conor Benn. You had that relationship, and what you effectively had was the explosion. It was an explosion in the British algorithm. And in the first fight, they had what I would call an epic moment. It was a truly epic moment. Now, here's a question. Did Chris Eubank Jr. have the best walkout or the best ring walk in boxing history? Because that was phenomenal. From a British perspective, it was a significant moment, a truly significant moment. And I think most of us just really appreciated that moment. And in the fight, obviously, we had the egg slaps, failed tests, broken relationships to rebuilding relationships, and an absolute brilliant fight. And that's what matters. But this was like Hollywood cinema. It was like Hollywood cinema because Chris Eubank Jr. went to a dark place. And in going into that dark place, he found a magical moment or magical moments in the last couple of rounds of the first fight, which this leaves the question, what did we learn? Now, from my perspective, the Chris Eubank Jr. mistake was the negotiation of the rematch. I know this is hindsight bias, I know. But Chris Eubank Jr.'s defeat, he defeated the rehydration clause in the first fight. But the second fight, it looks like that the rehydration clause, it just took his soul. Of course, we have to give credit to Conor Benn. And the credit is that he was an improved version in the rematch. Better jab, better feints, more composed. And, critics may say, if you beat a dead man walking, how much credit do you deserve? But it was a better Conor Benn. There's no doubt about that. But we need to remember also that Chris Eubank consented to these terms. He consented to the compromise that ultimately cost him dearly. It cost him in the first fight, but he was able to pull out magic. But it cost him in the second fight, and it just seemed like nothing was there. Perhaps we learned that money can put us in compromising positions. And if we agree to that, the obvious philosophical question is it worth it? What's more important, money or legacy? Legacy, let's be honest, it does not put food on the table. But what is the table if there is no passion and there is no dignity? And if we're negotiating our own demise, don't we have to take ultimate accountability? Because if I sign a contract to a rehydration clause, I've done that on my own accord. Now, Conor Benn's team, they did the right thing. They did a fantastic job. They negotiated terms that were extremely favorable. They did that. But more importantly, Chris Eubank's Jr. team were complicit in that negotiation. And that to me would be a question I'd be asking myself. Anyway, the British boxing algorithm completely surged. They broke the internet in the British context, figuratively speaking. Maybe it showed you that you could make world-class money without actually being a world champion. Now, this is no disrespect to these two men because they were gladiators that got in the ring, so they both deserve respect. But let's be honest, part of this fight, or the electricity around this fight, or breaking the internet, was an acknowledgement that their fathers opened the door to this fight. It was their names that made this fight enormous. And the first fight between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. not only lived up to expectations, but it might have even surpassed expectations. So it was funny because there's so many layers to this fight. You had the father's legacy, that builds interest. Then you had the shenanigans on the failed test. We don't want to talk much about that. But again, that builds further interest. Then you had the egg slap. Then you have these press conferences, and Chris Eubank Jr. phonetically is brilliant, and he really does a great job in marketing, and we've seen that. And then you have this tremendous fight of exceeding the expectation. So this really had a massive surge in British boxing, And I think there was so many lessons to learn from this fight. Another thing I forgot to mention, with regards to Conor Benn was it showed how important experience is, because even though I know that there was the rehydration and things of that nature which could have compromised the second performance, but I do feel that Conor Benn was significantly better in the second fight. And I think that his boxing IQ had increased, and I think he learned a lot from the first fight. So in a way it's sad, because I think that the rehydration clause actually tainted Conor Benn's progression. It actually tainted his progression, and it kind of robbed him of his victory, because it was a victory and he did feint very well. You know, he used the feints effectively. He did some really good body work at the beginning. You know what I'm saying? I think the feint took away the jab. From an outsider looking in, the feint took away the jab. The body shots were sickening. They were truly sickening. And his accuracy was impressive, and he was able to back Chris Eubank Jr. into the ropes. So he just was able to completely dominate. His defensive responsibilities were better. So he showed improvements in defense, improvements in offense, improvements in his psychology. He showed that the relationship with Tony Sims, I believe, is good. I think Tony Sims deserves a lot of credit for putting together a very good game plan. So I think Conor Benn can really walk away from this, and he has, people are making the arguments that Conor Benn is not a world-class fighter. Let's put that to the side. But Conor Benn has had experience of fighting in massive events, because this was a massive event. So he will have greater experience of fighting in big events than most world champions at his weight, because the event was absolutely huge. It completely captivated the public, completely. And he can take a lot from that. Allegedly, there was some speculation, or, that Conor Benn confronted some people afterwards that he wasn't happy with. That's unfortunate, I think, because I think, in a sense, Conor Benn had showed some maturity and had showed some evolution in his character. So hopefully the people around him can kind of guide him accordingly, because approaching people aggressively that you don't like, I get it, because it's the whole thing of, if you pretend to like people you don't like, then you're being fake. And I get that. But at the same time, there's a level of decorum, and I guess you don't have to like everyone, but people are allowed their opinion. But let's at least acknowledge that Conor Benn has evolved. His boxing IQ has evolved, his defense has evolved, his offense has evolved, and his experience has evolved. I guess the other question then is, can Chris Eubank Jr. come back? There's the whole thing about he's got some medical condition. I'm not sure if that medical condition has been, I'm not sure if there's been a label for this medical condition, but there has been some speculation. And I think he put out a post stating that he would only come back if he's 100%. The question is, can Chris Eubank Jr. ever be 100%? And if he is 100%, even if he's 100% healthy, can he be an effective force as a boxer? I guess the objective truth is that maybe not even he can answer that question, because the truth to that question would be revealed in the ring. But he did look like that if you look at Chris Eubank, one of his biggest things was his fighting heart and his resistance. And those things just didn't seem to be there. Obviously he's a very tough, mentally tough, stoic character, but he just seemed like he couldn't do anything. Yes, he did try to use the jab. Yes, he did try to throw counters, but he just couldn't go through the gears. And that's what Chris Eubank Jr. does. Despite that, though, regardless of whether he can perform at an elite level, Chris Eubank Jr. he's a master of marketing. He's a master of marketing. So even though he might not have the boxing ability anymore, he will still have the ability to create marketing, to create excitement. And I think whatever Chris Eubank Jr. does, people will want to see it. Obviously, one of the big questions is to ensure that whatever journey he takes, that he prioritizes his health, and also learn from the mistakes from the negotiation, because the negotiation made him a lot of money, but it would appear that the negotiation also would have had some detrimental effects to his physical health. So he needs to learn from that going forward, because money is important in a capitalist society. We need money to survive. We need it for food, clothing, and shelter. But if your health is ultimately sacrificed to a significant standard, then, as some people say, health is wealth. So I understand negotiating to get the highest price, but don't negotiate the highest price to the extent of your health, because then that doesn't appear to be worth it. But in conclusion to this chapter, or chapters that they've had, they have created something that is powerful and that really resonated throughout the British boxing universe. And to be honest with you, it didn't only resonate in the British boxing universe. I think the whole boxing world, to a certain extent, was aware and engaged with the story. But the British boxing universe specifically, they really enjoyed this one. Did you think the fight was entertaining? I thought the fight was entertaining. I think he had a specific strategy to deal with a former two-time heavyweight champion. But yes, we're not going to say it was as technical as a Floyd Mayweather fight, and I'm talking about when Floyd Mayweather we're talking about when Floyd Mayweather within his prime. But the point is that there's loads of different questions. Was it entertainment? Was it good business? So let's give the final words on the Anthony Joshua Jake Paul situation. Now, Eddie Hearn went on the Ariel Helwani show. I think that's the correct pronunciation. Now, both of these guys are super charismatic personalities, so I was really interested with this one. And Eddie Hearn in that show actually gave credit. He actually gave credit to Jake Paul for his chin, his punch resistance, and also the way he moved around the ring, which I was really impressed with. I think a lot of people, if they're honest, would be impressed with that. And Anthony Joshua, according to Eddie Hearn, is now dominating the American market. And I actually spoke about this, how Anthony Joshua's team have used Jake Paul to try and blitz the internet. Well, in effect, they've used each other to build on each other. And Anthony Joshua, of course, was always familiar with American boxing fans, but now there's a familiarity with the casual American audience. Now, is this negative? No, it's not. It's completely positive, because by breaking the algorithm, Anthony Joshua is getting a new viewership. And that new viewership is primarily coming from the American market. And what does that do? So how is it beneficial apart from its cultural impact? Well, that gives him extra bargaining power. So it's important for cultural impact, and it's important for capitalism. Eddie Hearn acknowledges that the virality of the fight, or that the virality of the fight, was the right hand and the double broken jaw. So these were the viral moments. Remember that jab to the body that set up the right hand that went right through the target? This was the parts that, figuratively speaking, broke the internet and allowed Anthony Joshua to absolutely make way, penetrate into the American market. It's exactly what they wanted, and it's what it's done, according to him. So the gamble, I guess, from this perspective has worked. The American market has been further penetrated. The brand has been further developed. And you can kind of ask that question, like, why is it important to develop a bigger brand? Well. Bigger brand, bigger cultural impact, and of course, bigger money. This supports not only AJ, but it also supports AJ's team. People keep talking about that, how much he got paid, 50 million, 90 million. A lot of that, I believe, will be a tax write-off, because he'll have people to pay, coaches, his whole team, which, you know, I would think would be quite a lot of people. So he's penetrated into the American market, which gives him cultural impact and gives him additional negotiating power, hopefully, for the Tyson Fury fight. I don't know what the figures are with regards to Anthony Joshua, Jake Paul, but clearly Anthony Joshua and Jake Paul are massive branded names that have such a massive algorithm push. So even if you look at search engines like YouTube and things like that and Google, Netflix is pairing its name with Anthony Joshua, with Jake Paul, and these are massive machines. So Netflix is huge on its own. So is it taking over boxing? Now, as we all know that Netflix is competing in the boxing jungle, figuratively speaking, and the money is like flowing exponentially. It's flowing. So if we take, say, something like the Tyson Jake Paul situation, I believe it brought in over 60 million viewership. 60 million. Now, if attention is currency, then this is a huge move in the right direction for Netflix. And Netflix, of course, they platformed the Canelo Bud Crawford fight. What was this fight? This was a fight for boxing purists, but it also brought in other audiences. What were those other audiences? So you had like the Mexican audience, you had the American audience, etc. And the viewership for this fight slightly lower, but it was still 40 million. And taken on its own, that is an astronomical figure. I don't think other boxing platforms are even competing on that level. That 60 million, 40 million level, that's another level. So, this is very significant, and Netflix really made an entrance here. However, to understand if Netflix is the African elephant in the jungle, because the African elephant is the strongest animal in the jungle, we need to understand and process and comprehend its business model. Or what is the business model of Netflix? They're not selling pay-per-view buys, they are selling effectively subscriptions. So then the question formulates, or the question becomes, how many subscriptions were purchased based on the fight? So not only how many have been purchased, that's separate. How many were purchased based on the fight? Now, unfortunately, when we talk about the Canelo Bud Crawford fight, we do not have that data. But what we do have is gate revenue, which is the ticket sales. So I've seen a number, and the number is, again, astronomical. I've seen a number of like 47 million. 47 million. Now, that is completely insane. Remember, the attendance for this fight was 70,000. So the live gate, from a layman perspective at least, was a success. Obviously, you have to deduct all the additional expenses. But from a layman perspective, that is phenomenal. So here is a reasonable question. So Netflix had 41 million people, 41 million viewers. How does 41 million viewers turn into concrete revenue? This is a rational and reasonable question to consider. It's a reasonable question to ponder. Well, of course, we have the concept of subscriber acquisition. So if we have a 2, right, let's say we have a 2 to 5% sign-up conversion, this would be 800K to 2 million subscribers. So a 2 to 5% conversion of the 41 million is 800K to 2 million subscribers. So remember, that revenue is reoccurring. It's reoccurring because it's a monthly subscription. So it's rolling January, February, March, April, May, June, July, etc. Now, this is important because think of when you buy a book, you buy a magazine. It's a one-time payment. So you go into the bookshop. You look for your favorite book. You see it. I like this book. You purchase it. You only pay once. But when you get Netflix, it's reoccurring revenue. So what does that mean? It means, say, if you have the cheapest tier, you don't just pay $5 this month. You pay for next month. Okay, so we've described that. But what's important about that is a customer can have the economic potential of being $500 to $2,000 to $5,000, depending on how long they have the subscription for. So that's a really interesting business model there. But then the question becomes, is Netflix winning in the boxing jungle? Because Netflix competes in many jungles. But is it winning in the boxing jungle? Well, they're winning the numbers battle. But DAZN, for example, a competitor, has a very unique boxing ecosystem, or has a boxing ecosystem like other boxing channels. Netflix turns boxing matches into serious cultural events, but DAZN has weekly boxing output and arguably has a significant regular impact. It doesn't have the massive cultural impact that Netflix has with these single events, but it has that ecosystem which is consistently pumping out content. So in a sense, you can say that DAZN has a better product, But Netflix is creating these massive, massive, massive cultural events, which gives it a legitimate entrance into the boxing jungle. So when you analyze this, you kind of think to yourself, what is Netflix's next big move, or what is its projection for 2026, specifically within the boxing context? So how do they keep growing exponentially? What are the fighters, or because I guess you got the boxers and then you got the actual fights, could they tap into other massive superstars within the boxing sphere, or could they invest in trying to develop an ecosystem, or is it about just having these single, once every quarterly or once every 6 month massive fights? And where are those massive fights? Where are they going to come from in 2026? It seems to me, from an outsider looking in, that the money is there, and the viewership is there, and the sponsorship is there, in terms of sponsors who want to attach themselves to these type of large events, because like we've stated, the attention is currency. Now, I guess one of the advantages that Netflix have over others is, yes, there's a subscription in terms of whether it's, I don't know, £5, £10, £15. I think there's different tiers. However, other competitors will have subscriptions and pay-per-view charges on top of that. So I think Netflix has this angle that I think audiences, let's be honest, people don't want to pay anything, but they would rather pay monthly than pay monthly and then having to pay a pay-per-view price on top of that. So I think that gives Netflix a unique angle, and clearly the money that they can generate, or the money that they can pay the fighters, is enticing, because obviously none of this can come together, none of this comes into fruition without tempting fighters with massive amounts of cash. And it would appear that when we look at the samples, so you look at the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul, 60 million, over 60 million household viewership, that has exceeded expectations. So from a viewership perspective, it's exceeded expectations. How that translated into economics is hard to tell, but like I said, the attention has exceeded. Then you have the Crawford Canelo, and I would have thought the attention would have exceeded there, even though it was less than the Tyson Jake Paul. It's still an astronomical figure. I don't know what the figures are with regards to Anthony Joshua, Jake Paul, but clearly Anthony Joshua and Jake Paul are massive branded names that have such a massive algorithm push. So even if you look at search engines like YouTube and things like that, and Google, Netflix is pairing its name with Anthony Joshua, with Jake Paul, and these are massive machines. So Netflix is huge on its own, but by attaching itself to other massive boxing brands, Netflix doesn't only build itself up generally, it's also building its boxing presence. So I'm actually intrigued. I'm intrigued to see, what does Netflix do in 2026, and will this rise continue? And are they looking to compete with the competition in terms of to take out the competition, or are they going to just be alongside the other competition? So maybe all these other boxing platforms can operate in their unique space. So you've got these other platforms that have unique boxing ecosystems, and then Netflix comes every quarterly or every 6 months with just a massive event that kind of shakes up the algorithm and shakes up the boxing world and the general audience. So maybe there's a space where they can all operate within the jungle, as opposed to one side takes over another side. It's interesting, that's putting it mildly, but it also has the potential to create big boxing events that people want to see. So this could be really beneficial for the consumers and for the boxing purists and for the general audience that are just tapping in for the entertainment. Just wanted to make a final point, and that's to acknowledge that, yes, we know that Netflix has a lot of money, so that's evidenced. Well, it's evidenced by all of the transactions. To get Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, that's a heavy economic transaction. And then allegedly we had the Canelo 150 million. Now, I believe that 150 million wasn't for one fight. I think that was for a deal. But still, 150 million is a massive amount of money. However, here's the important point. It's not just Netflix that have money. Their competitors also have substantial investment and large amounts of money. What does that mean? It means that just because you have the most money doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to win the battle. So money's a part of the equation, but it's not the only part of the equation. And that's why other platforms that have a boxing ecosystem, and when we've got a boxing ecosystem, what does that mean? That means weekly boxing content. That means boxers that are in contracts. That means they have relationships with promoters and managers. They have a significant stake, or a significant stake. They have a significant stake. And what this might mean is that each boxer brings a massive brand. Think of Tyson Fury, huge brand. Usyk, huge brand. Crawford, now a huge brand. Canelo, huge brand. Anthony Joshua, huge brand. The list goes on and on and on. But it's not necessarily just about the brand. It's the connectivity of the relationship with the brand that they are fighting. So, for example, Anthony Joshua is a huge brand. Jake Paul is a huge brand. But when you combine it, you get an even bigger brand. So when you combine the Netflix, Anthony Joshua, and Jake Paul, you combine those three ecosystems together, it becomes massive. However, what might be most important is the power of matchmaking to deliver fights that people want to see, and those fights deliver the entertainment that people want. And it might be more a case of you don't only have to win the economic battle in terms of paying the promoters, paying the managers, and paying the fighters. You have to win the battle of putting on the fights that people want to see, collaborating with the correct brands, and then those fights delivering on the promise. So the fights delivering entertainment, and also having an ecosystem that can really promote the fights as well, because you need to be able to promote the fight, promote the intensity, and then deliver on the promise. So you have to have the marketing machine, and then the product has to live up to it. So matchmaking is important, marketing is important, obviously money is important, the boxing ecosystem is important. There's many different elements here.